Hi there. Welcome to this brief introduction to Revelation, chapters 4 and 5, which I've entitled A Sight to Behold and a Song to be Heard. My name is Dr. John Harrison, and I'll be kind of taking you through some of the things that I see in Revelation 4 and 5 and how that spoke to the original audience of Revelation and how it also speaks to Christians today and our desire to worship God. So we're really seeing this as both a kind of a contextual reading of Revelation 4 and 5, drawing out some of the things that can be seen about the literature and what would have been understood by an ancient audience and how they would have interacted with that literature. And I also see it as a liturgical contextual reading. In other words, the way in which the vision of John speaks to us as we seek to praise and worship God in the contexts of our lives. So I'll begin here, first of all, with asking a question. I'm wondering if any of you have ever seen Disney's film Fantasia. You can probably pick it up now on YouTube or on some other site. And I would certainly want to encourage you to take a look at it. And this rendition of A Night on Bald Mountain shows a great deal of the creativity, the imagination of the Disney animators as they try to draw in individuals into imagining the way in which this music evokes certain images. So if you have seen A Night on Bald Mountain, I would ask the question, what is it that we see? And, at the beginning, what we see is a mountain that is bare and rocky. It's rough. It's not a pleasant looking mountain. It would be a very difficult mountain to try and climb. It's barren in a lot of ways. It doesn't have lush trees on it. But as the music progresses, slowly we begin to see that this mountain opens up. And as this mountain opens up, what happens is a beast appears. And we don't have to have anybody tell us that this beast is a scary beast. There are enough indicators from the way in which the beast is depicted that we already have clues that this is not a beast that we'd want to cuddle up with. This is not a beast that we want to invite into our lives. We see that the beast has horns, and we see this beast has sharp teeth, and it has claw-like hands as if it uses those claws to rip flesh. The piece kind of continues on, and we see that this beast is calling forth the dead, and all kinds of spirits arise out of graves, and this beast has powers that are amazing, powers that intimidate us. Strange creatures are concocted who have some kind of playful dance in front of the beast that gives him pleasure as he taunts with them in his hands. The music takes us into this world in which all of that which comes out at nighttime, all that comes out of the darkness, all that is terrifying, comes to the beast and kind of honors the beast. So it's a frightening picture, and in one sense, if we were to actually see this in real life, this is something that occurred, we would be horrified. We would be running for places to hide. We would cower at the sight of the beast and what might happen next. We would wonder what would come to our rescue, what would come to our aid. And so the imagery of such a terrifying and horrific beast, strikes fear. into individuals. Now, of course, as we're watching an animation, we're seeing the comfort of our seats, and we know that what we're watching here is, make believe. It's just animation. There's not really any sense of fear that we have. Well, I oftentimes use that animation of Night on Bald Mountains to help students see something about what's happening when they're going to encounter or engage with the book of Revelation. They are again seeing imagery that is quite common to the people in the ancient world and what it connotates, especially for an audience that could be well versed within the prophetic material of the Old Testament. There are images that call some of those scenes to the forefront. And as well, there's other images that are borrowed from other kinds of literature in order to depict a future that the author sees has arrived or is getting ready to encroach into human history. So John's revelation would have been experienced by John's audience in their context, the time that they're living, as what scholars today will refer to as apocalyptic literature. So it's an apocalypse. In fact, our English word revelation is translating a Greek word, apocalypse. So this is the apocalypse of John. There's a lot of things about this work that we don't know. Tradition has it that it's John the Apostle, but I'm not of that persuasion. I think that the author clearly indicates that there is a period of apostles and that he does not belong to that group of apostles. Instead, this John is a part of the seers. He has a vision of something. And so what an apocalyptic literature does, and there are several material that existed at this time. So when I say at this time, I'm referring to somewhere around the end of the first century, so possibly around AD 80 AD, or around maybe 90, somewhere during this time is when this work would have been composed. And the author is using a technique that draws readers or an audience, because the book of Revelation starts off with, blessed is the one who reads and they who hear. We have to think of this literature as something that is experienced by the original audience as a drama that is performed for them. Someone is reading this text, and with their voice and inflection, they are drawing the audience into the vision. And since there were other apocalyptic literature at the time, many of John's audience would kind of know what it is that they are experiencing. They could make some references to other kinds of literature that does the same kind of thing. So in some way, like what happens with us when we see an animation, we know we're watching animation. We know that A Night on Bald Mountain is not really happening. We know that people have set this up. And so something of an apocalypse is kind of known for what's taking place, that we're engaging an audiences with imagery and symbols and ideas that have these kind of connotations. We're not having a description of what actually is taking place or exact things that will take place. The symbols and imagery are supposed to elicit different kinds of responses from the audience and to direct the audience in a particular direction. And so that's how John's audience, who are probably Jewish Gentile Christians, since Gentile Christians too would have been immersed in readings of the Old Testament, at least with a kind of a Christological understanding of the Old Testament. So, a Jewish Christian audience who probably are going through a time of distress and suffering. And most apocalyptic literature is written in such cases. They're not really written by or for those who are enjoying prosperity, those who see that the world is good. Usually, apocalyptic literature is written for people who share the worldview of the author that something is terribly wrong. And this is dangerous times. And we need a narrative that allows us to be able to withstand what is going on, to be able to decipher what is going on. And so John's revelation is picking up all of this for his audience and is helping them to direct them to a particular response. So we do want to see this revelation in John's cultural context. So apocalyptic literature typically would elicit at least three major responses. It would respond a response of gratitude, because the audience knows that they are being brought into something that is hidden. So it's an apocalypse, so that means it's revealed, revealing something that others don't know. But the audience is getting to know that. The audience is getting an insider's view into this. And what they are being brought into is a future that God has in store. Most apocalyptic literature, maybe not all, but most apocalyptic literature depicts something of a future activity that's going to take place, where God is going to bring about a different age or a different scenario than the one that is being experienced by the audience. And so one is grateful that they're brought into the company, the community that receives this revelation. And so they get to know what God has in store. And that what they know about what God has in store can be known while believers are suffering. So while suffering oftentimes elicits a response of anxiety, or elicits responses of fear, gratitude is what comes out of experiencing the privilege of getting to hear the revelation. But there is also dread. So because in a lot of apocalyptic literature, what is coming is at first will not be pleasurable. So there seems to be a kind of a pattern for a lot of apocalyptic worldviews that before God's great age will come, that is, before the age to come will arrive, or before the day of the Lord in which God sets the world aright, there's going to be another period that is going to be very painful for the followers. So this is a period where this is a period of time in which you see an increase of wars and an increase of plagues and famine and distress in the world. And so the faithful needs to understand that they have to gird their loins. They have to steel themselves. They're going to need resistance because some very terrible things are getting to take place. And, some may have described it as the birth pangs of the Messiah. Before the Messiah comes, before there is salvation, before there is a rescue, it is if there's these forces that are at work in the world to stop this, or there is forces that are at work in the world that knows this is coming and that it can't be stopped, but are going to try and do as much damage as possible. And so because these forces are at work, there should be dread. There should be an awareness that some terrible suffering and pain is getting ready to be experienced by humanity and even by the faithful. So while you can be grateful, you can also dread what's getting ready to take place. But there's also hope. Um, Hope because no matter how awful, and I'm using that term awful here, both in the sense of things that um, create in us a sense of being in awe, of amazed, of wow, something that's awe-inspiring, and in the sense of being excruciatingly painful. In other words, I feel awful. I'm just in a lot of pain. In both sense, no matter how awful things are, God is sovereign. God is always sovereign, even in the midst of what is painful, and God is sovereign even in the midst of things that mesmerize us and startle us and leave us bewildered. And so the idea then as well is that God is at work in these things, and he wins ultimately, and so does the faithful. And particularly hope in the times when it seems that all is lost. I've sometimes paralleled it to the idea of playing chess. So if any of you know, have ever played chess, imagine a very official game of chess, and in which all of your pieces have been taken, and all you got left is your king, and you're trying to save your king and move your king around the board, and your opponent has several pieces still left. They have a queen and a knight, and so they're coming after you, and they're trying to put you into a situation where they can put you into checkmate, and the game is over. And you get to a point where it almost looks like, well, checkmate is just going to be the next move or two. I'm almost done. I've almost have no place to run. They've boxed me, get close to boxing me in. And just as you think it's going to come to the end here, your opponent reaches across the board and their arm accidentally hits their king and knocks their king over. Well, in an official game, that opponent has lost. You didn't think they were going to lose, but now all of a sudden they have lost. They seemed all powerful. They seemed like they couldn't be stopped. And then all of a sudden, their downfall. Well, so too in apocalyptic literature, it gets to a point where everything looks like, why have any hope? It looks like the faithful are going to be completely eliminated and destroyed, and that there's going to be nothing left. And God was not the God that we thought he was, and that the forces of evil are stronger than our God. And so basically we will be, subsumed in all that. But in the end, God does win. Evil is defeated. And the faithful win as well. And the faithful end up reigning, even when it looks like they would have been eliminated. So in John's context, it would have been quite helpful to have these things. So I do think that John's audience most likely was experiencing some kind of suffering. We don't know quite the level of persecution that they may have been going under. I do think that there have been Christians who have been killed prior to this time. There is some question about the level of official Roman persecution of Christians in the 80s under Domitian. But it is likely that some kind of level of pain, most likely as well, because many Christians are not supposed to be engaged in the imperial cult. They're not supposed to be involved in worshiping or recognizing the divinity of the emperor and that family. They couldn't participate or shouldn't participate in the pagan cultures, which is oftentimes a sign of loyalty when you participate with the gods of your city and your area, your locale. To not participate in that would be seen as a rejection of the community's values. So there could be a response that Christians are having to go through. some Christians may capitulate and end up siding with the people who are actually oppressing and causing the sufferings, but others are trying to resist. And this particular work is trying to continue to encourage Christians to resist the temptation of joining those who try to make money off of the power that's in play, and warning them that whoever makes their bed and lies with power will end up in the same fate. So instead, be grateful that you now know what the world has coming, and be alert. You need to be on your toes because a dreadful thing is coming. But even in the midst of the dread, have hope. God is sovereign, and they'll win. Now that's John's kind of cultural context, but I want to just briefly talk about as well our own hearing of Revelation in our liturgical context. And though our world is a very different one, for many those Christians, we don't experience the kind of persecution and suffering that John's audience would have, although there may be different kinds of sufferings that some Christians are experiencing in different parts of the world. Nevertheless, though our situation is different, no matter where we live, we respond in worship to the revelation, to what it is that we are going to read in chapters 4 and 5, by praising what they would have praised. And again, a couple of things that we can just highlight that they would have praised. First of all, they would praise that God is holy. Revelation 4:8, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, which is really a song that we sing in our worship time. You may be familiar with the song, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. And while earth is full of his glory, the whole earth is full of his glory. The whole earth is full of his glory. Holy is the Lord. And so we sing that song trying to take us, as it were, to a different place, that while some things in this world are not pleasant and not what we desire, we still recognize that God is different. God is not lacking in control. He's not lacking in sovereignty. He's not lacking in compassion. And no one can stand in comparison to God. He is unique, and he is beyond what we can comprehend, although he has revealed, or he shows something of his power and his majesty and his uniqueness. But not only is God holy, but we also recognize that God is all-powerful. There is another song that we frequently sing called Almighty, and you might be familiar with the words, Almighty, most holy God, faithful through the ages, Almighty, most holy Lord, glorious, almighty God. The beasts of the fields, the birds of the airs, are silent to call out your name. The earth has no voice, and I have no choice but to magnify God unashamed. Let the rocks be kept silent for one more day. Let the whole world sing out. Let the people say, Almighty, most holy God, faithful through the ages. Almighty, most holy Lord, glorious, almighty God. Again, we in our worship sing about the God's power, even though in our context sometimes why won't God do something? He seems so powerless to rectify the situations that we are in. But the author of Revelation 4:8 takes us into that visions where the celestial host sing about God's power, sings about his ability, about his strength, even while those on earth can't see it. The heavenly world does see it and recognize it, and invites us here on earth to also see it and join in that chorus. And finally, as well, the author in chapters 4 and 5 will remind the audience and remind us today that the Lion of Judah has triumphed. So we're introduced to a lamb who looks like he was slain. And this lamb, though, is actually the Lion of Judah. And this lion has triumphed. And so we're seeing the heavens proclaim that he has triumphed, even though worshipers, the faithful, those who recognize the Lamb, don't see that triumph, don't see that victory yet. But again, in our worship, we proclaim that. So again, there's that song victory chant, Hail Jesus, you're my King, your life frees me to sing. I will praise you all my days, perfect in all your ways. So recognizing that, again, our lives may not have evidence of Jesus' victory over the things that causes our suffering, we nevertheless join in the author of Revelation 4 and 5 in recognizing what heaven sees, and that God is ultimately triumphant through Jesus Christ, his Son, and that no matter what Christians have to face, no matter what they have to endure, we know who the one is who is totally victorious. And so we'll go through 4 and 5 in a little more detail, and kind of looking here at the ways in which these texts spoke to John's audience and why they also speak to us as we seek to worship Christ today. Thanks.